Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we are joined by Cornelis J. Schilt. Dr. Schilt is an associate professor in history and philosophy of knowledge at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels and the founder and president of Lux Mundi. He was born and raised in the Netherlands in a reformed environment and converted to Catholicism in 2017, together with his wife Anke, at Oxford. He holds degrees in physics and astrophysics and history and philosophy of science from Utrecht University. And after a successful career in IT, returned to academia because he wanted to teach. He obtained a DPhil in history of science from the University of Oxford, studying the religious and historical writings of Isaac Newton, and stayed on as a junior research fellow before he moved to Brussels, where, among others, he heads a European Research Council funded project in computational humanities. Shocked by the deterioration of university education he witnesses every single day, he decided to build Lux Mundi, a new liberal arts college in the Flemish heartland, where students are challenged to be transformed into the best they can be. He lives with his family in a small village in the Flemish countryside, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, where the parish priest still believes in God, and where traces of the good and beautiful can still be found, and apparently where every now and then sheep try to escape through a fence and we have to cancel a podcast and move it to the next week.
Yeah, that actually happened.
Dr. Schilt, it's such an honor to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. I'm glad you mentioned the sheep. They will be thrilled to know that they are now a celebrity.
Are they safe and sound?
They're safe.
Safe,
sound is with sheep. Well, let's not go there.
Well, wonderful. Good. I was thinking about, starting the podcast in German just to throw off our listeners a little bit, but a better judgment prevailed. But I was able to say Vrije Universiteit, so that's something. We were talking before, and I said, should we call it Lux Mundi? And maybe some of our American listeners are going to say, Lux Mundi, isn't it Lux Mundi? But you said we should educate the English-speaking friends. It's Lux Mundi.
Lux Mundi, light of the world.
Beautiful. Well, we'll get to the light of the world here in a little bit. Let's start, as we always do on the Anchored podcast, by talking about your own educational background, which of course is, for our listeners here in America, a little unique. You grew up in the Netherlands. So talk to us a little bit about your upbringing and your education.
I was born and raised in a small medieval town in the province of South Holland, which is not in the south of the Netherlands, but it's the southern part of the original province of Holland, which is more like the coastline of the Netherlands. So it has cities like Leiden and Rotterdam as its capital and so on. So I grew up some 15 miles east of Rotterdam, small provincial town, nothing going on. Apart from busloads of tourists who would come there on a Thursday afternoon with, the cameras, when we had those things still, cameras. And they will marvel at all these beautiful buildings. And I would just be there 15, 16 years old delivering, new newspapers and thinking, what are these people doing there? And then when you go to college, you return a couple of years later, you realize this is actually a really beautiful, nice town that I grew up in, and I didn't realize. So I just went to school there, both primary, secondary school. Nothing spectacular, nothing at all spectacular. A bit sleepy, a bit boring. I was very bright, actually. I was miles and shoulders above everyone else. My parents, working class, loving parents. I was on another planet. If they were Earth, I was Pluto. What they did give to me was a love of history. My father is quite an avid military historian, amateur military historian. He collects antique firearms from the Dutch Golden Age. So I grew up in this rather conservative environment, Protestant environment. Went to Bibles, went to Sunday school. Fell in love with Christ, I suppose, at a young age. No Mother Mary for Protestants, which is sad, but catching up on her, which is great actually. It's something that Protestants dearly miss, this maternal love. In school, I took all the regular topics, but I had actually no idea what to do with my life. And my father is a small business owner, so in the end, I felt I had to choose between something management related or something informatics related. So I picked my secondary school subjects based on that. So it included a bit of physics, a bit of German. You like it? Yes, I did
Sehr
German.
schön,
I
yeah,
did German for
super.
my A levels, as the English would say. Other languages, the Dutch and languages, that's a given. But actually, I had no idea what to do. Teachers were not very motivational, to be honest, and I was not very motivated to do anything in university apart from just something useful, I suppose. But yeah, that all changed much later. I went to university and became quite disillusioned.
Yeah.
Dropped out of college, you might say, after halfway year three. My first degree that I never finished was in management. And eventually I discovered physics. The fact that you could actually study something, a topic in depth, uh, something called academia. I'd never heard of that. That was not part and
Hmm.
parcel of the world I grew up in. There were no academics in my childhood. I was the one asking all the wrong questions in church that no one was prepared to answer because they never thought of that. So there was not much of an intellectual stimulus there. And then I discovered physics, age 23, and that was just challenging, and it was fascinating, and it was bloody hard work.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I enjoyed it. And I was 5, 6 years older than all those prodigies, 17 years old who skipped a class, who were married to their computer, and had no real life, but mathematical geniuses. And there I was, a bit older. I wouldn't say mature, no, not really, but just a bit older, seen a bit more of life, and very much enjoying what I was doing, just studying something in depth, just for the joy of studying. And I also encountered topics in history and philosophy of science, and eventually I made my career out of those, but not straight away.
Right. But you obviously your father instilled in you kind of a love for history of old things. Now you're discovering, so to speak, physics, and you're pursuing physics, and then you study the history of science. I mean, was it at that time, was that, oh, that's how I can kind of combine my two loves, or did you kind of stumble
I,
into
th-
that?
I think I lost some of that love and in my late teens because of this very boring secondary school environment.
Hmm.
And to be fair, the relationship between my father and me was also deteriorating because he really didn't understand what I was doing, and I didn't appreciate him for whom he was. And we reconciled much later, but there wasn't
Okay.
much of a stimulus. Um, I studied physics, and there were optional courses in an introduction to history of science and so on. And I took those simply because I could. And I thought, hang on, this is very interesting. This is what I used to love when I was a kid. And so when the time came to pick a master's, I first tried my hand at theoretical physics, but very soon I felt completely lost in the abstract equations and formulas. And then there was this 2 year research master on offer, history and philosophy of science and foundations of physics, and I had all the required preparation. I'd done all the required courses for that. So I switched masters after a couple of months, and that was absolutely beautiful. From foundations of quantum mechanics, which I could now follow because I'd taken courses in quantum mechanics, to courses on science and religion, and even one titled Isaac Newton in Context.
Ah.
And that was a fascinating course because we were presented first seminar. We were presented with a poem, and it was a love story between Venus and Mars, and we were reading it, and then the seminar leader basically said, "Well, this is actually an alchemical recipe," and it was copied out by Isaac Newton from some 14th century manuscript, and he tried to recreate it, and he had to decipher this because there is a symbolic meaning. Venus means something else. Mars, that's iron, and so on and so on and so on. And I fell in love with Isaac Newton. Eventually, later on in life, I did my DPhil at Oxford on Isaac Newton's uh, non-scientific writings, his religious studies, his studies of
Hmm.
ancient history. but that love that was laid back there.
And I see him there, and for those watching on video, I see Isaac Newton there
Staring at us.
in the corner.
It's the one Protestant I still allow in my house, and all my family, of course, and most of my
I was
family.
going to say, and you tolerate your family too. At that time, right? I mean, I think a lot of people today have this idea that, well, if you're pursuing the hard sciences, physics, you have to in some way try to reconcile that with your faith, or even can you? What were those conversations like at that point as a believer? And I'm just assuming. I mean, I went to German university, and I was one of the only people that believed in Jesus.
Yeah.
What I'm assuming at university in the Netherlands, especially in physics, there were probably not a lot of fellow believers. Were those ever conversations you had, or were those mostly conversations you had with yourself about the reconciliation of God and the sciences?
Well, I never had to reconcile those. I mean, for me,
Yeah.
it was pretty obvious that this day and age is the aberration, not the past. The Western world is in this state of psychosis, as Ian McGilchrist would say. It's something gone rogue. I mean, 95% of the world is somehow religious. It's just the 5% of silly people in the West who think that they are now, that they are now the norm, but no, they are the exception, or rather the aberration. But indeed, studying physics, I was the only religious person, the only Christian person at least, and this is 25 years ago. And my fellow students found it actually quite interesting. Most of them had come from secular homes, because apparently studying physics is also not something that Christian people do easily. They pick different topics, oddly enough. Well, I think that it's so important that Christians should tackle these really hard studies and be a force for the good in the hardcore sciences, because by Jove, they could do with some religion. But the conversations were actually quite interesting, because they found me a very curious case, someone to whom science and religion are two sides of the same coin that are not in any conflict whatsoever. And I suppose I found a lot of my faith in this, or a lot of my security, if you like, in simply looking at all the scientists of the past. You mentioned Isaac Newton. Now, he was a bit of an oddball, being an anti-Trinitarian Protestant, but he was a staunch believer. To him, the sole reason for studying physics, he would have called it natural philosophy, was to show that God existed, and that he was the one making this universe spin, and that his providential hand could be discovered. To him, even hardcore science was related to morals. He had a whole theory about this, but finding this out as a student in college, an older student, that is, a mature student, that was just fascinating. And to me, I was involved in all sorts of faith and science debates in the Netherlands at that time. We had a discussion even in the Senate about intelligent design, one of the Christian parties we still had back then. The Minister for Education was interested in this. Books like Darwin on Trial were translated in Dutch. And in the end, I actually did my master thesis on young Earth creationism. I studied this as a topic from a historical and philosophical perspective, because I was just fascinated by how that worked. And it turned out, then I found out that one of my two master's supervisors was actually a young Earth creationist himself, whilst also being a physicist. Wow. And I thought it felt like he had it coming out, with me.
Yeah,
that sounded all wrong, but let's keep this in, because he was just a very nice reformed Christian, a loving person who finally found someone interested in what he held as gospel.
So your experience to that point had been in the Netherlands, your educational experience, but then you end up going to the University of Oxford, right, the premier university in Europe, maybe in the world, to obtain a DPhil in the history of science. Talk to us a little bit about that that process, how you ended up at Oxford and your time there.
I was in my early 30s. I had a good career in information technologies.
Mm-hmm.
I was married now, no kids yet, and I felt my brain was dying.
Hmm.
I made good money, but intellectually and spiritually, it was not nourishing whatsoever. And I felt I was wasting my time on earth, more or less. And I had a good conversation with my wife, and eventually we decided, yes, you have to continue your studies somehow. And then Isaac Newton again popped up, and I realized that if it's going to be a topic that I wanted to study, it will be history of science. That was very clear. It will be something with Isaac Newton. So I basically located the biggest expert on Newton and religion. Turned out he was not at Oxford, but at the University of Sussex.
Hmm.
Now, that is one of the more progressive universities, still is. To give you an example, Kathleen Stock, who is a feminist lesbian sociologist, was removed from that university for not being progressive enough. It's that progressive. Blue hair is common, not the
Wow.
exception. But they had a very good historian of science, so he accepted me as his student. 2 years later, I'm at the Huntington Library in San Marino, which is on your side of the pond. I get a phone call. He says, I've been accepted for a full professorship at Oxford. Would you like to come along? And let me quote him: "You'd be an idiot if you'd say no." Now, of course, I briefly considered this, whether and so, but of course, I said yes. And then I had to go through all the admin procedure and basically reapply and more or less start from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, ending
It's
up at
Oxford.
Oxford, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not complaining. When I arrived at Oxford, I realized that this was no longer the institution that it once was. Now, Oxford, of
Right.
course, is a collegiate university, so it has. Back then it had some 38 colleges and 6 halls, and the colleges differ vastly in terms of, let's say, political outlook. There are some that are still relatively conservative, like Blackfriars, and then there are the more liberal ones. And of course, I ended up at one of the more liberal ones, Linacre College. Lovely people, but incredibly progressive. When someone in 2016, just after Donald Trump was elected first, made a comment saying, "Well, we should celebrate this in the common room," he was persona non grata for a couple of months because they were all in tears that the end of the world had just arrived with Donald Antichrist Trump, although that would not be a problem for these non-Christians. But, a Black History Month, LGBTQ plus alphabet soup, etc., being promoted everywhere. If you were to have a conversation on abortion, you better not have this conversation because, yes, not very welcoming to people who have a different outlook from anything that is left-wing extremist. Now, it was very known to people that we were Christians. We actually converted to Catholicism whilst at Oxford. And after my studies, I was elected a junior research fellow, which is quite prestigious. But that doesn't mean that I felt happy not being able to simply speak up and to declare my position on so many matters. But we were running a house with students. We were basically, my wife and me, we were living on this, 40 square feet. Yes, I'm not joking, 40 square feet, small room, and just 10 other students there. And we had conversations at the dinner and lunch table every single day because, again, they were so interested in finding Christians who would speak up about their Christianity, who would openly talk about their conversion to Catholicism. Christians who also said, I don't understand everything, but I just believe that this is the right thing to do because, and so on and so on and so on. People who did not, echo from an ivory tower, but just sat with them at the table, embraced them, hugged them, shared in their sadness and in their joys, just being human, I suppose. And I think that what created this intimacy. But we were miles apart on many aspects of morals or ethics or how to live one's life.
I think for our listeners here in the US, what you're describing does probably not seem that uncommon to them, especially when we're thinking about some of our public universities, our research universities. Maybe they would be surprised to hear that is happening at Oxford. But, probably what they would expect at most universities in the US. You made your way, obviously, to Brussels, where you are now, or at least close to Brussels. And you alluded a little bit to your criticism of some of the institutions. But you clearly became disillusioned with the idea of the university
Yes.
as it is in Europe. And I think in a previous conversation we've had, you said that these institutions are no longer universities. I would love for you to speak to that a little bit, what you're seeing in Europe, and of course, what ultimately led you to, and we'll get to that, to found Lux Mundi. But what is kind of your major criticism with the colleges and universities in Europe?
My major criticism is that they no longer educate, which last time I checked was the sole purpose of a university. One thing, of course, is that many universities have turned into research institutions where teaching is secondary. When you're an assistant professor at a university, you have to teach 4 or 5 courses every term, but your performance is being measured by the number of papers that you produce. So this of course is detrimental to both. You don't have time to do proper research, and you don't have the time to properly prepare your papers, your teachings, basically. Now, students, you would think, expect quality teaching, but students in Europe no longer expect anything from a university. They have now been told that they can find true knowledge on TikTok and Instagram, and the teachers are not very motivating or motivated themselves. Well, you can see why, because with such a heavy teaching load and such a heavy research load, they too are not really allowed to teach in ways that they want to teach. They have to follow a set curriculum, and that curriculum is determined by a very left-wing agenda. But that's not a problem for most, because if you ask them what their political affiliation is, they would say, to translate to American, Democrat, or simply Marxist. Because in Europe, many academics no longer have a problem saying that they are Marxist, because they think Marxism is a good thing. It was just never tried properly. They literally say these sort of things. And these are then the people that we trust the teaching of the education of our children to. And it's not just the humanities, in the sciences too. Biology works with the genetic difference between male and female. That's a building block of biology. But you didn't hear those people speak out during the gender craze, which is only still happening here in Europe. I know it's slowly waving in the United States, but why not? Well, because if they speak up, then they will be the first one to be sacrificed on the altar, because other people are waiting for to take in their place. So there is a climate of fear with those who think differently from the mainstream. And the mainstream is very left-wing. And they believe that teaching is not about presenting a spectrum of ideas and then allowing the student, and then forming their students in such a way that the students can make their own decisions. They believe that a good academic is an activist who promotes one version of reality, namely their own idea of what reality is and how it should be seen. And I don't think that's very healthy.
It is not. Now, I attended German university 2007 to 2009, and I went through all my undergraduate classes without speaking to a professor once. They would come in with their microphone, and they would do their lecture, like you said, not very motivated, and then they would leave, and you could not even get office hours with them until the very first class that I took in my master's, and I could sign up, and I think it was 4 months. Wait time to speak with a professor. Well, at that time I transferred to Hillsdale College, but it was, which of course was very, very different. But I think what struck me about it was until I transferred to a liberal arts college in the US, I never even heard anyone talk about the pursuit of truth. That was the point. I mean, to me, the point was always just to get a piece of paper, to get that job, to make that money, right? I mean, that was the goal. What I thought was the goal of the university. It was essentially just credentialing, right?
But university was never set up as professional education, as leading towards a profession. It was designed to build character, to form. There is a German word that the Dutch often still use, Bildungsideal,
yes.
Bildung,
Yes.
which means, and so it means that university education should equip you to handle what society throws at you. But of course, these days, young people are being told that they can expect from society to change to their every whim, because that's the example they see from their professors too. Because let's not forget who's on the barricades, and this was in '68 already. Those are professors too. They believe that they should be activists about everything. They are not in for the pursuit of truth. I'm not sure what they want, but it's not a good thing. And I think I saw this most clearly some 2 years ago on the 7th of October 2023, which is a date that most of us will remember. But for me, it holds something special because it's also my wedding day. On that day, of course, Hamas attacked Gaza, 1,200 casualties, some 250 people being taken hostage. And then 3 days later, on the 10th of October, which I also remember very well because it's my wife's birthday, my colleagues from Ghent University, which is a nearby university with whom my university partners frequently, my colleagues from Ghent University issued a statement condemning the genocide by Israel. This is 3 weeks before Israel retaliated. It didn't even mention the events of 3 days before. Not even a yes, but not even that. So it was so completely devoid of reality. But it was signed by 2,000 national and international academics, including people I shared an office with. And I thought, really? These are the people that we trust the education of our children to? I knew it was bad, and I have been entertaining. All right, maybe I just have to be a force for the good, The one conservative professor at a progressive university. I have several friends who have that role. For some, it means that they will never get tenure, or rather, never get beyond where they are now. So they will always remain assistant or associate professor. And in Europe, when you have a position, it's very difficult to be removed from that position. But you won't be happy. You won't be happy. You will always be fighting against all of your colleagues, and that's not for the faint-hearted. But for example, I have a very good friend in Minnesota, Duluth. He's associate professor in history of religion. He spends 30 plus hours per week in his office, having office hours, because his students know that he cares about them. And Minnesota is, of course, not a very conservative state. No, it's probably it's more progressive than California last time I checked, which tells you something. Half of the female students that he sees are transitioning still. Give you an idea of how unhappy these kids are, and he's just a father to them. He's just there to listen to them because they realize that he listens, and he's an Orthodox Christian, and I respect him deeply. He's in his late 50s now, and you can see how it drains him, how tired he is, how fatigued. But he does it because he believes this is his calling. And after October 7th, 2023. I realized that my calling lay somewhere else. I did not yet know what or how, but slowly I think the Lord began working in me more than just an idea. Thinking, what do we need? What should university education be? And this eventually became Lux Mundi.
Wow. Well, I want to say I'm shocked, but I'm not. And we could probably have a multi-hour conversation about how Germany reacted to the attacks on Israel, and given our history, there's so much I could say, but let's focus on the good, because of course you mentioned you wanted to be a force for good, and that is Lux Mundi, and so you were already toying with the idea of do I want to just stay in that my little bubble in a kind of a hostile environment, where I see that what we're doing is really not educating and forming human beings, or do I take the leap of faith and do something different, something better, maybe something that is actually education? And so you're founding a university in Europe, outside of Brussels.
Doesn't happen daily, no.
It does not. It does not. Well, I gave a talk yesterday, and I mentioned that since COVID in the United States, about 100 universities have closed. That's the trend, right? Universities actually closing. You are starting a new one,
Yeah.
Lux Mundi. Talk to us about the inspiration. Of course, you mentioned the negatives, right? Which you saw, the criticisms, but what's kind of your vision for Lux Mundi, and how do you think it can be a source for good?
Well, first thing is, it's not it's a leap of faith, and yet it's not a leap of faith in the sense that I waited until I think I got the go from our Lord, because I could have started something straight on the 10th or the 11th of October, just running away, or running with this idea and so on and so on. But I just waited. I waited. I waited. I too was once young. Yes, it's amazing, and I was very bad at listening. So thank God our Lord is very patient. There are young people who started colleges because they had a vision, and the Lord blessed them abundantly. When I was 25, 26, I would not have been able to do what I do now, because I first had to learn to be obedient. I was a rebel. That right now the Lord wants me to be a rebel again, I suppose, but a different sort of rebel, a rebel with a cause. And that cause is that young people deserve better. And young people deserve a place where they can be truly challenged and will be challenged, and where they will be transformed into a force for the good. Because, by Jove, the world needs young people who are equipped to deal with everything the world throws at us these days, from climate change, energy transition, to the ethics of artificial intelligence and how it will change the world. Those are enormous challenges, enormous changes that happen so rapidly. And these days, the products of university education, and we're still talking about people, of course, but it's almost like robots are being produced. People who are being told what to think, how to think, when to think, as if that's what's appreciated by society. Well, it's not. We're well connected with businesses all over Europe and beyond. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars per year just to find creative people who are willing to tackle difficult issues, who are not afraid to make mistakes, but people who believe that they can make a change, and who are stable, mature individuals, and they can still be very young, but they are in a sense capable of thinking globally, capable of thinking wide concepts, abstract concepts, and connecting them with day-to-day reality. This is what any university education should provide. On the one hand, you're being told how to think abstract, and on the other hand, you're firmly rooted in the earth. Because in the end, it's not about the skills that you gain or the knowledge that you acquire. It's about who you are and become as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
With Lux Mundi, we decided to focus on the seven capital virtues as our guiding light, the four classical and the three Christian virtues, because these are the virtues that human beings in times past were focusing on, that they strove. I'm very bad at grammar, as you can hear. That they strove to acquire, that they strove to perfect. They looked at the saints for inspiration. They prayed the saints for help, to petition God to give them more of certain virtues. Make me more courageous, make me more loving, make me more prudent. That's something I could have used when I was younger. But anyway, so at Lux Mundi, we focus on these core qualities. We believe that we can do in 3 years what American colleges can do in 4 years, but that's also because, Europe has a 3-year bachelor program, so we follow that. The idea is that, when you studied with us for 3 years, a great books program with a Western twist, with a lot of Western history, from Plato to Hannah Arendt, and Machiavelli and Aquinas, yes, also Luther and also Marx, because our curriculum is not conservative. Of course, it's
Right.
also not progressive. It's classic.
That's right.
It's classic. And we don't want our students to learn, this is Marx and he's bad. We want our students to learn, this is Marx. This is what Marx wanted. This is how he was motivated. This is what has been happening. This is how Marx was appropriated, misconstrued. This is where he went wrong. But in the end, all our tutors, who are full class professors, will be able, say, to both defend Aquinas and bury Aquinas. This sounds like cussing in church, but to give you an idea, we don't want any of our teachers to just preach their own gospel. We want them to be able to defend something fully and then play devil's advocate, because that's what we want our students to do too. To pick up any given theory, any given dogma, even if you like, and inspect it from all sides, because that's the only way we can connect with modern society, and that's the only way you can become mature and form your own opinions, the good, the beautiful, the true.
Are there any universities that you have either visited or that you know about, whether it's in the US or beyond, that you would say, not necessarily you modeled yourself after, but you would say they're doing something right? It's for our listeners to kind of see, oh, that's kind of the direction that you are heading with Lux Mundi.
I think places like Hillsdale and Christendom, Thomas Aquinas, they're doing a lot right. St. John's, before it became a little bit woke, yes, I'm saying this, yes. They're doing something right too. We've actually, we're quite inspired by their curriculum. But we don't believe that you should put 15 students in a room with a seminar teacher who then says, so what did you take from this? We believe that we put 5 students in a room with a professor who's knowledgeable. And then we spend time, what did we just read? How did it influence society up till today? And then what did we get from this personally? To have that triad in there. That's what I believe is small-scale teaching. The Oxford tutorial model is brilliant, because this is actually what we're replicating. But at Oxford, it's being taught by underpaid master's students and PhD students. So obviously quality is not stellar. The model itself is great. That's what we're trying to replicate.
Yeah. I am so excited about what you're building, and I think our families are going to be already intrigued by this. A new university, 3 years, pursuing truth, small class sizes, no professor with a microphone, right? What I experienced.
No lectures.
It's going to be a community. Talk to us a little bit about where the university will be, because I believe you have something in the hopper there.
God willing, because the deal is not done yet, but we're getting closer. We will be in a 12th century abbey, half an hour away from Antwerp, so within an hour's distance of 2 airports, yet in the countryside, in the tranquility, in buildings where people have studied, have worshipped for centuries and centuries. The ideal location for a university. It's where it all began, because after all, the Western University is a product from the monasteries.
Absolutely. Just some of the details maybe our listeners are interested in. Of course, you are Catholic. Is this only a school for Catholic students, or could Protestants or maybe even agnostics or atheists attend that university?
We welcome students of every faith and every walk of life, but we will be a Catholic university. Probably in all but name, because contrary to the news that has reached the States, Belgium is no longer a Catholic country. It's the most atheist country of Europe. It makes the Czech Republic look incredibly pious, to give you an idea. Less than 2% of people go to Mass more than once a month. Even the Germans, even the Dutch are more Catholic. So
it's hard to believe.
It's hard to believe, but in Belgium, the scandals in the church are milked every single year. There is an anti-Catholic sentiment. But we want to be the light of the world. So we will put ourselves on that hill, because that's how the quotation continues. A city on a hill cannot remain hidden. We will stand out. We will get backlash. That will happen. And that's normal, and that's good, because it means that we are seen. It means that we are visible. So, but it also means that we expect from our students to respect the Catholic tradition. There will be daily Mass. You're expected to be there. It's not mandatory. Mandatory is on Sundays. Then we want you to go to Mass. You'll be there. It's part of being at Lux Mundi. But there will be peer pressure for you to be there on weekday mornings too. We happily provide that free of service.
Because it's beautiful. So especially for American high school students right now, and maybe parents that are disillusioned with some of the American universities. And I think what we're hearing, of course, constantly is the faith commitment of the institution is really important to kind of the students that take CLT, right? The other one is the rigor of the institution. There are some schools that are, maybe more of a glorified Bible camp than a serious academic institution, and that's important for our families. And I think we touched on both of those. The third one is the affordability of the institution, and so I can imagine right now some families just being enthralled by what you're providing, but thinking, oh boy, university abroad, that has to be really, really expensive. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, you'd be surprised. A year at Lux Mundi will cost you approximately $35,000, everything included. Tuition, meals, and dorms. You'll be there for 3 terms of approximately 13 weeks. We will have all sorts of activities, including a peregrinatio through Europe, reading Plato at the Parthenon, Montesquieu in Paris, Machiavelli in Florence, where he worked and lived. But that's all included. At least for the first year, the first 40 students will get full scholarships. And we're trying to get this for the second and third cohort too. But we're still negotiating with our investors. Because we found investors who are really willing to support what we are doing, good Catholics. Our concept that we intend to roll out all over Europe is also preserving religious heritage. So there is a win-win situation on both sides, because there are plenty of beautiful monasteries in Europe that are at the verge of being closed because they cannot make ends meet. We know exactly what to do with those monasteries.
Yeah.
And maintaining daily Mass.
So for the first class, and remind us, when is Lux Mundi start, and when is the first class coming in?
Well, keep an eye on your inbox. We're going to go live with our advertising in November, the way from Lux, and we will start in September next year, 2026. First 40 students will arrive on site and have an experience of a lifetime.
Absolutely. I mean, and just from a cost perspective, just traveling to Greece and Florence and Rome and Paris, just that itself will cost you probably $10,000-$15,000. Now you're not, and that's all included in the package of $35,000 for
that's all included. I mean, yes, students, of course, will still have to pay for their flights back to the States 3 times a year. That's the idea. But the rest is all included in the 35K.
Wow. That is
because we can do it. One of the goals that we want, we want our education to be affordable.
Yeah.
In the end, I'm working with partners to create scholarships for the foreseeable future, so that no one will have to be excluded on the basis of the financial situation of the family.
Right.
If you want to do through diversity, equity, and inclusion, well, this is our inclusion. No one should be left out of good education.
That's right. We're all deserving of it. Well, I'm excited this is in a way kind of for us, for CLT, the launch of making sure that everyone hears about Lux Mundi. And so I'm so excited for this podcast to release, for families to get more information, to see, and we're going to say a prayer, of course, for the monastery, that all works out, because it's beautiful. You shared with me kind of where we're hoping to be, and it's absolutely stunning. And of course, for more information, more details to come out. But this sounds absolutely incredible, and we're so excited to partner with you in that. We strongly believe in what you're doing, and I know our families are going to be excited. I know we could talk for hours and hours, and there's probably a follow-up conversation we should have maybe in January, February, just to get an update on where we are. But for now, we're going to close with this last question, and I'm going to ask you to be disciplined, sir, because I know this is This is a tough one. But if you can recommend to our listeners one book or one text that has had the greatest impact on your life, what would it be and why?
It's probably Pope Benedict's Caritas in Veritate, because we live in a world that has a very different understanding of what love is or what caritas is. And even in the church, there are times when people think that they should sacrifice truth because of love. Alistair McIntyre, who recently passed away, wrote about this in extenso, about how the virtues of today may not be the virtues that we had in the past. The names are the same, but the contents are different now. And these are very small changes. And Pope Benedict brought us back to this with his encyclical, which you can find online in so many languages. He brought us back, always, always speak the truth in love, and never let love take away from the truth.
Beautiful, beautiful. Again, we're here with Dr. Schilt, who is an associate professor in history and philosophy of knowledge at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, but more importantly, is the founding president of a new Catholic university in Belgium called Lux Mundi. Our listeners, I'm so excited for you to learn more about the university. We'll have some show notes that include some information about it, and hopefully you can stay informed on all the great things that Cornelis is working on. Dr. Schilt, it was such an honor to have you on the podcast. I'm sure the first of many conversations. Mein Freund, ich danke dir that you joined our podcast, and I hope you have a blessed day.
Peter, thank you very much. The pleasure was all mine.